Hey, how are you doing this morning? So we've gone through a few tutorials now. We're starting to build on that, actually starting to see our project take form. So if you follow along in the last one, we entered all of our tasks for our project, including really establishing the work breakdown structure with some kind of a structure. So we have summary tasks, we have milestones, we have other tasks. Again, it's just a small example project, not intended to be complete or anything else, just there so we can see how we can use Microsoft Project to our benefit when it comes to managing a project. So having all of our tasks in there, what we need to do now is to start to add the connections or the linkages, the predecessors, the dependencies, depending on which school of thought you come from, all sorts of different language we can use around it, between the tasks. And in doing that, because we've chosen automatic scheduling as our default and put all of our tasks in with automatic scheduling, we will start to see Microsoft Project calculate when they can happen and start to develop a plan for us, if you will, as to when these tasks are going to happen. Now, like everything, there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can input this information into Microsoft Project. I'm going to try to cover off some of the basics so that we can see them, give you a few thoughts as to how I like to do things, and then really go from there. So we're here in our entry sheet. So this is our basic default Gantt view. So we have entry sheet. So if I were to look at this, we see that it's on entry sheet, which is a great place to start. We have our tasks input. So that was on the last tutorial. I'll put a link up here in case you've missed that one and want to go back and see how we do that. And they all have durations assigned to them, but there are no linkages. There is no network diagram. If we were to look at the network diagram, we just see a list of tasks. Why don't we do that? So we go over here, right click, look at the network diagram, and we just see a whole bunch of unrelated tasks. And so this is not a project yet. This is just a list of tasks. So let's go back to our Gantt chart and see if we can't make some sense out of this. So in Microsoft Project, we call them predecessors, which is to say those tasks that have to be done or near done, or we can get into those some of those nuances later on before we're able to start the task that we're looking at. And so it has to precede it. And then, the corollary of that, of course, is we're by default choosing successors, those tasks which should follow the current task that we're working on. But normally we try to think of what has to be done. Now, in project management, typically I would limit these to what I would call causal dependencies. You can't build a wall until you have a floor. So there's a physical constraint. It's not a scheduling choice. It's not, I want to schedule the wall for that week. I want to schedule the floor for this week. Those aren't the kind of dependencies that we should be doing here. You'll see them. You'll see people use these predecessors to basically force the schedule to do what they're thinking they want to do. I tend to, because I've had a lot of experience with high tempo projects, I find if we link it up with other than the causal dependencies, what it does is it starts to limit our courses of action to achieve our goals the way we would want. So as a general rule, I say, at least on the first blush, go through only adding causal dependencies as your predecessors. And if we want to use it to simplify scheduling or resource deconfliction and that later on, you can consider it. But try to avoid that, because really the way the program is set up, we're intended to use constraints to do scheduling nuances, whether for resources or to meet calendar needs or anything else. So let's jump into the program and let's see what we can do. So we have our bathroom renovation up here, and I want to start to do some dependencies. And I'm going to slide over my split screen a little bit so you can see. So we have a column in here for predecessors, and that's on by default. I don't have to add it. We're not going to be doing resources right now. So let's just keep that nice and tight, and we can see the predecessors. Now, as you will see, when we add a predecessor, it's going to add the number of the task which we are assigning as the predecessor. So, for example, certainly, when we think of doing the stud walls, we have to complete the demolition before we do that. There's going to be a connection between demolishing and starting the stud walls, i.e. one must be finished before the other. And if we look over on our sheet, we see now that as a predecessor to the stud walls, we need to have completed demolish existing bathroom. Over on our Gantt sheet, we see this link. Now, the only reason why there's a gap in here is because Saturday and Sunday are non-working days, but otherwise it is nose to tail. So when one is finished, we are free to start the other task. And because it's automatic scheduling, you see that it pushed it out to do that. Now, the way I added that was simply to go on to my Gantt chart. I'll do it one more time. So we also have to finalize our plan before we're willing to start building the stud walls, although we can probably start the demolition before we have our plan finalized. So I'm not going to hook it up to the demolition, but what I am going to do is I'm going to draw this link between finalizing the plan and starting the construction on our stud walls. And so I'm going to add this the same as I did the last time, and now it mirrors what we did. So that's one way that we can add these predecessors or dependencies between our tasks. Not really my preferred. When you get into playing on the Gantt chart view itself, we tend to start to play with our biases and how we envision the schedule coming and forcing it to do what we're thinking in the back of our mind, rather than looking physically at what those dependencies are and trying to implement them and let the schedule do the schedule. Let the program manage that space. We're going to have lots of opportunity later on when we look at resources and other allocations to manipulate the schedule. So for now, we just want to let the program manage the schedule. So I'm going to do most of my work over here on the entry sheet. So we have 4 and 2 as predecessors for our stud walls. And so as we look down, we have to, we have to have our stud walls done before we're able to start on any of the rough-ins. Now, that being said, the rough-ins themselves could happen in parallel if you have enough room and everything else within the thing. But those are scheduling constraints that you might want to consider later. Really, if the stud walls are done, you are able to start the plumbing rough-in, start the electrical rough-in, and start the HVAC. And so stud walls is activity 6. We see that over here. And so the easiest way to create that dependency is just to type 6 in the column where it says predecessors, and we now have this link to the rough-in plumbing. And I would do the same thing for the other rough-ins. And now you see how the schedule is automatically starting over here in the Gantt view to take form. And we see how, because the plumbing rough-in is longer, the other two are not on the critical path, and their slack is now being calculated, and they're starting to come real value in the Gantt chart as we build this up. Now, I rather like this way of building it up. Now, indeed, because I showed you in one of the previous videos how I tend to work in Excel to amass all this information, right? So all of the estimates for our individual tasks in the work breakdown structure, their predecessors or dependent tasks, causal dependencies, normally in the projects that I've worked on, they often either get developed by myself or they're bottom-up fed, and so they're all amassed in Excel. And you can see I have this project done in Excel. I'll just switch my screen. And you can see I've done that, and I've gone through and I've looked at all these predecessors and I've built them in here. Now, the difference between the project that I'm working on right now and this is that this has as number 1 the dummy task, so these are all off by 1 number. But as long as I had them lined up and worked out correctly, I can go ahead and figure out what all these are, and I could just even copy and paste them in. understand that it's going to be off by a number. But if I were to copy for utilities inspection, which needs all of our utility rough-ins to be done on 8, 9, and 10. So if I go back to Microsoft Project and I go down to my inspection and I paste those in, it puts in 8, 9, and 10. Now we know that those are all going to be off by 1, so I'm going to have to change them to 7, 8, and 9. But as long as I had matched everything in Excel, you can see how you can save a lot of time and do that. And so here we have our milestone now, marking our inspections at the end of all of our rough-ins. So there's a bunch of other ways where we can do this. So for example, if we had a series of tasks that had to get done in order, let's say we were going to do all of the finish work in succession, and I went up to task and I just pressed on the link button, it's going to automatically do those finish to start, nose to tail, if you will, for all of them. So that's one way where you can do that. Now I'm going to undo that because I don't actually want to do all of those nose to tail, but I wanted to show you how you could do that. So I'm just going to very quickly go down here and add something. So for this, we want our inspections done, and inspections is number 10. So now we can get that. And once the drywall is started, so this would be 12. Now, the way I've conceived this, once we have the stud walls out and the inspections are done, all our rough-ins are done, we're ready to start the radiant floor. We don't have to wait for the walls or anything else to do. So again, that would basically have the same tasks here as there. So I'm just going to copy them down and paste them in, and we'll get that there. And then we can go nose to tail on that. Now when I look at my paint and finishes, obviously I need to have all of my drywall done. So not only do I need to have my drywall done for paint and finishes, but I also want to have my floor tiling done. So drywall would be number 12, and put a comma there, and the floor tiling is number 15, and we can connect that up there. And we're just going to quickly finish this off. And there we go. Now I'm just going to go up to here to view, choose entire project, realign everything. And now we can see, the first draft, if you will, of our Gantt chart, showing not just all of the tasks that are scheduled out in accordance with their predecessors, but also showing the critical path, which tasks are on the critical path, which ones are not. And for those that are not on the critical path, what is the slack that we have to play with? And that's a lot of information that's going to be very valuable to us in managing our project as we come up with conflicts and resource conflicts or even space conflicts. You might not want all of your rough-ins going on at the same time because of the limited space within a small bathroom, assuming it's a small bathroom. So that's really all there is to setting up those predecessors. And I've given you a few ways to do it. One thing I did want to do is to talk about the different kind of dependencies that you can put in using these predecessors. So if I were to go to stud walls, and let me just bring up the details for stud walls. So let's go to task details. So we're going to have to choose predecessors and successors, if you will. And we can see that the type that the predecessor is what they call FS, or finish to start. So it connects the tail of the arrow from the finish of the task that's preceding it and ends with the task, or goes to the start of the task where it's starting. Now, there are a number of different ways you can do this. The program is rather flexible depending on what that dependency or relationship really represents. So not only can we work from the finish to the start, we could work from the finish of one task to the finish of another task. So let's just see what this would look like. So if we're working on this task, so this is stud wall, so let's find it up here. So I've got it highlighted, and I'm going to play with the first one. So it's a finish to start, and what I want to do is to change it to a finish to finish. Say OK, and you see now that instead of being finished to the start of this, so what this means here is that the successor, so task stud walls, can't be finished before the demolish existing bathroom is finished. And that probably doesn't represent what we want in this case, but I wanted to show you logically what is available to us. The other ones you can work off of is, instead of going from the finish to the start or finish of the successor, you can actually work off the start of one task and go either to the start or the finish of the successor. So a start to start, so if I were to choose start to start here and see what happens, is that this task, the successor task, can't start until this one has started. And so if that you know, maybe you're laying down a subfloor and then you want to put tile on top of it, or the heated floor in our case, as long as we have enough of the floor started, maybe we can get started. And that can be accommodated too, because we have a start to start and then we have lag. And so what lag does is it basically says, once you start, plus or minus X number of days. And so lag can be positive or negative. And so if we say we need 3 days, so I'm ready to start this as long as I've got a 3-day head start on this preceding one. And so I can choose 3 days. And so what you see here is that this task is available to start 3 working days after the other task started. And so that's how that's working. And of course we can choose negative lag, which is to say I'm free to start the successor 2 days before I start the other one. And so that would be allowed here. Now it's not allowing it in the actual program because other dependencies are causing it to finish. So there are advantages and disadvantages to using lag. It can be very helpful in things like, you know, you need concrete to cure. So you build in enough days after a task is over. And so that would be a positive lag. It'd be a finish to start plus a lag of, say, 3 days to give adequate cure before you're ready to build on it. And so here we can also see in the detail view or in the task information box. Let's show that. So if we task information box and we go to predecessors, we can see them all labeled out here with lag and everything else. And it can be a very valuable resource of information in order to view in detail each individual task, including its predecessors and its successors. So I'm just going to switch this back now to, let's close our details. And I want to, you can see how that is showing both the lag start to start from 4 with a 2-day lag. And we want that just to be 4 finish to start. So we can just put 4 in there. And so we're back to where we were. And I just want to show you a couple of the views that you can see how things have changed now that we've got all of these dependencies programmed in. The first one, which I think is really important, is to go back and look at your network diagram. Oh, it doesn't give me the entire project. So I'm just going to zoom this out so you can see this. And we can see these are summary tasks over to the left, but we can see our network diagram with all of our successors going through. And, you know, there's a number of things that we want to look for to make sure that we're not getting ourselves into trouble. So, for example, here we have a link, you know, it kind of goes off to nowhere. So let me zoom in and see what that is. So that's the shower surround and tiling, but according to this, it never has to finish for us to be considered finished. So certainly the shower surround and tiling needs to be finished. Let me go back. So shower, surround, and tiling. So we have number 12 as a predecessor, so it can't start until drywall. And nothing has number 13. Nothing's looking back at number 13. So we certainly need the shower, surround, and tiling done probably before the paint and finishes, definitely before any of the cleanup and touch-ups. So why don't we put 16, we'll add 13 to it, and we will close that loophole so that we're not getting ourselves into trouble. So we don't want to have anything or trailing off and not leading to a logical end to the project. And we can talk about more about that later as we go through some of the issues. Everything should have a successor. So one of the things that we can do, we saw how we were able to use the network diagram. I can also insert a column here, and in this case I'm going to do successors. And I can shrink these down a little bit, give myself a little bit of space. And looking to see if anything doesn't have a successor. I'm not worried about the summary tasks, that's fine. But if something doesn't have a successor, then I probably want to look for a hole in my logic, because everything should have a successor. Keep in mind that this, at the very least, this dummy task at the end, this milestone that is a completion, a logical completion, you can always make something, make it a successor to any other task that doesn't seem to have one within the project itself. And that would be best practice for sure. So we can see predecessors, successors. We've seen the network diagram, a couple other views. So within this, now we can start to see, like in the schedule view, you can have the start and finish, and all of those dates have been updated over our project. Let's shrink our project down so we can see it. And it also gives the late start and late finish and slack calculations. And so this comes right out of the critical path method. And so we have our critical path showing, and it's being calculated for us. But certainly if you go back to what goes into the calculation with the forward pass and backward pass for that critical path determination, we can see that information being displayed here and represented graphically on the Gantt chart. The other view, we'll just go down. We can see in the summary view, this is a place where we're going to probably work later on. We have our start, finish, completion time, costs, and work. We're going to get there as we add resources and everything else, and that view is going to become more useful to us as we go along. And finally, variance view, and I just show it to you now because I want to show to you how it's going to change later on as we start to add more information. And so we have our start and finish. We're still going to add a few constraints to this as we add resources and whatnot and make sure that our resources are all working out. But we have NA, or not applicable, for our baseline start and finish, which is to say we're not finished planning. The last thing we do when we finish planning our project is we're going to establish our baseline so that we have a basis of comparison moving forward as we start to execute our project and fail to achieve it perfectly in accordance with the plan, which is completely normal. So at that point in time, once we set our baseline, these values are going to start to establish themselves, and we're going to start to see variance from that. So all of that is going to stem from a project which is well laid out with good dependencies, good causal dependencies associated with it. So they're there right now. So there we have our project with all its causal dependencies associated with it. What we're going to do next is we're going to take all of the estimates that we've done for all of our work packages, when it doesn't matter how they were established or determined, whether it was a bottom up or whether we sat down and figured them out, parametric estimates or whatnot, or doing PERT estimates over our costs. It doesn't matter what we did. We now need to incorporate all of that information from our work breakdown structure into our project. So we need to add resources and costs for each of our tasks. And from there, we're going to see some conflicts and everything arise, as well as our cash flow baseline is going to start to establish itself. So come on back for that. I'll put a link here as soon as I have it ready to show you. But what we're doing now is we're just moving on to the next stage in the planning of our project. So not yet ready for execution, still a few more planning steps left to go. So hope to see you out for the next one.